Welcome to Work Your Podcast, where we discuss podcasting and business strategies so you can simplify the process, balance podcasting and life, and grow your business.
I'm Bonnie L. Frank, an online visibility expert and business coach, former teacher and college professor turned entrepreneur overnight. And if you follow me, I'm usually live streaming.
And I'm Emily Prokop. I'm a podcast editor and consultant. I host 2 award-nominated podcasts, and if you follow me online, you'll get a water reminder. Today, we're talking about timing and consistency with your podcast. So, Bonnie, you were like all about this. So tell me, why are you so excited about timing and consistency?
Oh, my Lord. Well, where do I start? Let's see. My timing has been off for the past several days. My consistency has also been off for the past several days. Some of it having nothing to do with me, some of it major tech, and I just had to deal with it. And there was nothing I could do about it, which is unfortunate when your business relies on tech. But yeah, I have learned a lot of very valuable lessons about timing and consistency as of late.
And these are always the lessons you learn by making the mistakes, right? They're never just somebody tells you to be consistent. You're like, yeah. And then you make a mistake. And then that's when you hear from your audience. And it's like, where's this episode? I was expecting this episode. What's going on?
Yeah.
And I'm the same way, actually, with consistency. One of my podcasts, The Story Behind, actually is on hiatus right now. And for a while, because of my business, which has very little to do with that podcast, my business ended up taking a huge chunk of my time, and I had to put that on the back burner. So it hasn't been as consistent. But I think for you and me both, one of the big things that we did with our consistency when it was lagging a bit was letting our audience know somehow, some way, letting our audience know either on social media, on our mailing list. Sometimes people have put out podcast episodes to let their audience know, hey, we're taking a break. It's unexpected. This is a tiny little recording to do that.
If it doesn't put you in the poorhouse, let's get real.
Yeah, let's try to get consistent. So, Bonnie, what would you say about consistency? What are your tips for staying consistent?
So, if you listen to the Business Fabulous podcast, which is my solo podcast, there's episode 7 where I literally talk about how I was absolutely frozen for many months before I could even publish one episode. I was just frozen. I was terrified because I knew how consistent you have to be with podcasting. And I knew that it would change everything in my business. And I knew that I was going to use it to drive my business and that it would drive my business. And therefore I was terrified, and therefore I was frozen, and I couldn't start. For a long time, I couldn't start. So especially with podcasting, I feel like especially with podcasting, but honestly with blogging too, because if you have your loyal listeners, loyal readers, loyal viewers, if it's a YouTube channel, you've got your loyal viewership, your people, your raving fans are expecting that next thing. They know when it's supposed to come out, and they are expecting it.
And they've made you part of their schedule as well. Many times, I talked about it on the last episode, we have episodes of podcasts that come out that are a part of our weekly routine. Like Mondays for me is my big day to listen to the podcast about podcasting because those come out. Tuesday, I realized you talk about that. I usually listen to your show, Bonnie, on Tuesdays because that's my business day. That's when if I get a chance to listen to podcasts, I'm listening to business podcasts. So people do make you a part of their routine. So staying consistent is so important for that, and to get into their heads that this is somebody I meet with, I listen to every single week at the same time, maybe not the same time, but around the same time. Maybe in the same place. I remember when I was commuting, I knew exactly how long an episode would be, and then I would get to work and I'd turn it on and be like, yep, that was a whole episode of that show that I knew fit specifically into my commute time.
Yep. And when I started my podcast, I knew that my episodes were going to be about 20 minutes or for sure less than 30 because I was used to live streaming and it just always ended up that way. And I am telling you, ever since I met you and we really started talking about that, like mini-sodes and kind of where podcasts fit into your life and when you have to allow more time for, longer podcasts, let's say, a 3-hour podcast, something like that. There's only one of those, thank God. Ever since then, I am telling you, I am even more cognizant of my time of each episode. I'm like, okay, how long is this? When is Emily going to fit this into her schedule? I have such pressure now.
Oh my goodness. And that's so smart because I actually tend to gravitate toward the shorter form podcasts because being a mom, I don't have those hour-long commutes anymore to and from work. So I have to fit podcasts in where I can. Don't even ask me how many times I've listened to a podcast while in the shower or otherwise in the bathroom. But we're not going to go into that.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't? Get off this live stream if you don't. Come on. Seriously.
Okay, good. I feel better. So, Bonnie, what would you say people should think of when they're thinking about the timing of their podcast, how long they should make it?
I think everybody answers this question honestly from their own druthers, right? If they had a choice of podcasts, all podcasts should be between X and X amount of minutes. I kind of feel like that. There are really very few podcasts I listen to that are an hour or more. I mean, one being The Feed. We're both big fans of The Feed, and sometimes I have to listen a few times to one episode because I didn't get to take all the notes that I needed to understand everything.
And that's the podcast from Libsyn where they talk about stats and they go deep into the news about podcasting. It's very, very dense. And for new podcasters to listen to The Feed, you're going to be pausing and saying, what are they talking about?
Yeah, and that's me. I mean, that is me, the new podcaster. Woo! I'm on 5 months now. Woo! Hands up!
Yay!
So I do pause a lot. And sometimes seriously, I'm like, okay, I need to stop this and I need to pick it back up when I've got more time and energy to really concentrate. Because I do take notes and I will listen more than once. And it is dense. It is a lot of stuff. But yeah, the official Libsyn podcast is called The Feed, just like it sounds. Rob Walsh, who is hilarious and brilliant, and Elsie Escobar, who is also hilarious, just watch her dance, and brilliant, both co-host that podcast. And it's wonderful, but I have to be like in the right headspace and literally the right like time and space for that. So I really do like listening to podcasts that are shorter. And by shorter, I mean like 30 minutes or less. I really do.
Yeah, and you really have to look at your audience too. And going back to The Feed as an example, it's a very long podcast, but it comes out every other week. If that were a weekly show, I don't know if I would be able to listen to it as closely as I do because it comes out every 2 weeks, because it is very dense with information. So one thing I'll say to podcasters is to talk to your audience, find out where they listen to your podcast, how they listen to your podcast, what are they doing while they're listening to your podcast. If you have, for example, a walking podcast, great, fit it into a 30-minute walk. That's actually what one of my clients is doing. She's taking her walking podcast, she's making it 30 minutes. She's actually putting beeps in where she wants you to stop warming up and then another beep to cool down. Like, she is really thinking about her audience and niching down to like, what are they doing while they're listening to this podcast? How can I make it easier for them to fit it into their schedule?
Well, and that's actually how I started listening to podcasts. I started listening 6 years ago when I would take a walk. And I knew about how long people's podcasts were. And some of the ones at that time that I was listening to were more like an hour. It was an interview show and it was more like an hour. And I was just thinking about really starting a business. And so I had to consume a lot of content because I wasn't 100% sure what my business was going to be and how it was all going to shake out. So there were a lot of hours and a lot of miles that I spent walking and listening to podcasts, which was wonderful. But the downside of that is that I did have to stop and take notes on my phone, which then, of course, decreased my heart rate, which kind of obliterated the whole point of the walk. But I did get good information. So there's that.
Yeah. So another thing to consider when it comes to the timing and consistency of your show is when to release. So a lot of people we'll go into Facebook groups, and we see this all the time. What day is the best day to release your podcast? And if there were that one answer for everybody, everybody would be releasing on that date. So it's so funny when that gets asked. Bonnie, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I did mine on Monday only because somebody had said something about like morning commutes and whatever. But hello, if you're releasing your podcast on a day for a morning commute, that could be any day because people do work every day. Most people work Monday through Friday, but people do work every single day. But I just did it Monday for that reason. But it doesn't matter because if you've got good content and you are marketing your podcast well, and we'll certainly talk more about that, then they're going to find you. It really doesn't matter. It just matters that you stay consistent.
Yep. And a little quick tip for you, if you are releasing your podcast, hoping to catch somebody on their commute, release super early in the morning. Set that release time not for 6 a.m., set it for 3 a.m. Because here's what happens. Most people's podcast apps are set to automatically download new episodes if you are subscribed. So make sure that your listeners are subscribed. They know to subscribe to your show so that when a new episode comes out, it comes right to their phone. If you're releasing it at 3 a.m., and by the way, you don't have to stay up till 3 a.m., most podcast hosting companies have a way to schedule those podcasts. But if you do release at 3 a.m., when your listeners wake up, they get ready, they look down at their phone. Oh, good. That podcast is already on my phone, ready to go for my commute. So think about that. Release in the middle of the night. I've seen it do really well when you release around 3 a.m. I don't know why that does so much better than 6 a.m. I did 5 a.m. at one point, but something about 3 a.m. that was kind of my sweet spot.
Well, because your 3 a.m. is not going to be everyone else's 3 a.m., right?
That's true. I should point out I'm on the East Coast, so my 3 a.m. in California is their midnight. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And then there's things called other countries. And yes, we are an international situation here. So people from all over the world can be your audience. Your audience is not just local. I mean, it could be if you want it to be, but it sure doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be national. It could be international. Literally, your audience could only be limited to the amount of people on the planet.
Yeah.
So if you release it at 6 a.m., that's somebody else's 7 a.m. That's your 7 a.m. That might be too late. Maybe you like to listen to podcasts while you're in the shower, for example, or getting ready or on your way to the gym at 5 a.m. or something like that. Well, if I release it at 6 and that's your 7, I've now screwed myself and you can't listen at that time.
Yes, if you're wondering about your audience's habits, go into your Facebook group and ask them. Turn that into an engagement post of saying, hey, what are you doing while you're listening to my podcast? And get ready for some responses you might not be prepared for. You never know what people are doing when they're listening to your podcast. And they're definitely not there like sometimes I like to think the 1960s where people gathered around their radios and just sat there. Like nobody does that with a podcast. So definitely ask them what they're doing, where they're going, and that will give you a good idea of when to release. Now, when it comes to days of the week, for certain podcasts, it might be better to release on a particular day. So, for example, movie podcasts, when movies are going to come out that weekend, you want to release your episode maybe as soon as you see that movie, if you can get to the early one. But most of you are business podcasts. So that's something to consider as well of what day of the week works for your audience. So with us, we're doing Work Your Podcast. We haven't decided on a day to release, but in my head, I'm already thinking, oh, can we release on Wednesday? Because then it could just be Work Your Podcast Wednesday as a hashtag, because I'm all about alliteration, just to make it easier for everybody.
WYPW. There you go. Hashtag WYPW.
Exactly.
It's done. Let's do Wednesday. Done.
See? And that's another thing that we're definitely going to talk about is don't get hung up on these details. Don't go nuts. This isn't going to be a long episode because we're not going to break down exactly. Okay, so Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are technically the days that podcasts get the most downloads. So I'll say that right now, but that doesn't mean that that's the formula for when you should release. So don't nitpick it. Don't overthink it. If it works for your audience, that's the day to release it.
Right. That obviously begs the question, who's your audience going to be, right? Who's going to be listening? Like J.S. Gilbert, and your husband has probably heard J.S. many times because he's done voiceovers for video games.
Oh, then yeah.
Very famous ones, yeah. J.S. and I, we met on Blab, our IP Blab, rest in peace. And he's used to watching a live stream of me. He's not used to listening to a podcast. So he's used to watching me on a live stream, which is not really a portable situation. But podcasts are 100% portable. If you're watching a live stream, there should be a reason that you're watching it, right? So you either have more than one person to watch, or people are going to show a how-to something or other, or if it really just needs to be audio, well, there's your podcast. And now people are automatically going to be multitasking. They're not going to gather around their earbuds. They're going to be listening to you, of course, but they're going to be doing something else. Of course, asking your people, what do you do while you listen to my podcast? Like we talked about things that we do while we listen to podcasts. Nobody's just listening. Everybody's listening and doing something else, which is one of the beauties of podcasting.
And it's interesting, if you look at surveys done by Edison Research, one of the things that they said on there was that the majority of people don't do anything while listening to a podcast. And I have to ask, like, no, that can't be a real thing. You don't just sit there and listen to a podcast. They must be thinking, oh, I'm just commuting. I'm not doing anything else. Or I'm just walking the dog. That's not doing something. I'm just doing stuff around the house. So always think about what your audience is doing while they're listening to you.
Exactly. And they're not doing nothing. That's a double negative, which means they are doing something. Mm-hmm. They are folding laundry. They are driving. They are walking the dog. Whatever it is, they are doing something else. They for sure are doing something else, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to start a podcast. There was a litany of reasons, but that was one of them. Because if you live stream or if you're making YouTube videos, not everybody has unlimited Wi-Fi. I'm sorry, first of all, unlimited Wi-Fi. Not everybody has unlimited data. Not everybody has unlimited space on their phone. Those things play with live streaming and like in videos, like a live video or a pre-produced video. Those factors play into that. But with podcasting, they don't always play into that. I almost never listen to my car radio, and I love Sirius, but I got unlimited data specifically for podcasts, and I just drive around listening to them.
I do too. And it's weird because sometimes you forget that other people don't have unlimited data. So that's another reason why releasing an episode, if you want people to listen in the morning, the sooner you release it, if you release it at that 3 a.m. time, they're not using data to listen to you. And I remember before having unlimited data, I loved a podcast that came out every day not every day, but every week in the afternoon. And I would have to wait a whole day so that I could get back from work, where work wouldn't give us a Wi-Fi password. I'd have to go back from work seeing this podcast, and it would drive me nuts that I couldn't listen to it. Get to my house to get on Wi-Fi, download the episode, and people still do this. I know I'm very spoiled right now where we have unlimited data and I don't have to do this anymore, but I remember waiting for that podcast and having to wait a whole day to listen to it and being so mad, like, why can't you just release before I leave for work in the morning? That's all I want.
Right. I was there too. And my listeners, many of them are in many different phases of their business. And so some of them work a full-time job and then are building up that side hustle, which ideally will take over their business. So some of them are not like me. They don't work from home. They can't listen whenever they want. They do have specific times that they've kind of already carved out or are carved out for them in their schedule. So before their 9 to 5 or after their 9 to 5, that's when they can listen. So it's really important to know who your audience is so you can frame what you're doing, not just what you're talking about, but also how you're doing it, how you're putting it all out there specifically for them and their lives.
So if you would like links or information about anything we talk about on this show, you can find it in our show notes, which you can access in the podcast app you're listening to this by either swiping up or to the side or clicking that information button.
You can also head over to workyourpodcast.com and find out more about this and all of our past episodes.
And if you've enjoyed this episode and want to encourage others to work their podcasts, we'd love it if you would take a screenshot, share it on your social media, and tag us over on Instagram.
I'm Business Fabulous Podcast on Instagram.
And I'm Emily Peck Prokop over on Instagram.
And next week...
Ooh, what do we want to talk about next week?
I think we have to talk about audience. I think we have to talk about that.
Okay. So make sure that you're subscribed so you get that episode downloaded, as we talked about, as soon as it's released.
Which evidently will be on Wednesdays.
It will be on Wednesdays. Work Your Podcast Wednesday.
Get ready for the hashtag. It will be so viral.
So I have in our script, it just says sign off because we never did decide on a good outro. I actually just added to the last episode our actual goodbye, you and me, of like, okay, talk to you later. Bye. And I put that as our ending.
Well, let's just do that.
Okay.
I mean, we can just do that and we'll see how it sounds.
Yeah.
And then if we are like, oh my God, we hate that, then we can change it.
Yeah. Everybody have a great day and we'll see you next week. There we go.
Bye.
Bye. Fixing that in post.
Hashtag fix in post.
Hashtag fix in post for sure.
Oh, wait. Oh, now we're going live. I forgot to push go live. It's okay. Now I'll push go live.
Okay. All for the bloopers.
I actually have touched Emily before. We have met in person. We hung out at Sheep Hut.
That's a weird phrase.
Okay, you can get rid of that. Hashtag take it out in post.